Hello, people of XR and potentially other people watching this video. My name is Borsch. I represent here the World We Want team, which is formerly known as the Heading for Extinction team. And I'm here to present to you our very first draft of the World We Want. So let me see if I can share my screen first of all. There we are. I'm sharing my desktop and you should be able to see this. I hope to be able to present this to you in the next 45 minutes. This is where it starts. It's not perfect yet, and my delivery of it will not be perfect yet. So please forgive any minor glitches on the slides as well as in the way that I deliver it today. It's really just here for your feedback and hopefully your approval. So the world that we want, it is a talk that is offered as an antidote to the doom and gloom that many of us can feel about the climate and ecological emergencies and the terrifying reality of the natural disasters that we either see on our doorsteps or experience or watch on the news. In this talk, what we're trying to do is to show everyone that a world worth living in is possible and to provide people with tangible actions that they can start to do today, take away with them today, actions as well as thought constructs or keywords that they can bear in mind. And this talk is for everybody who feels sad or hopeless about the future of the planet and our species. If you feel motivated to take action, but you don't know where to start, this talk is for you. If you're not yet sure that you want to be a climate activist, but you do want to engage with the issue in other ways, this talk is for you. If you want to reclaim your agency from forces outside of yourself that seem to be controlling your destiny, this talk is for you. In this talk, we would like to convince you that there is a harmonious world to be won, but that the livable future currently hangs in the balance, but also that everybody can do something and everybody can multiply their impacts. I would like to give a lot of credit to the rest of the gang in this team who have made sure, together with us, that this talk is completely up to date and designed to tell the truth, such as XR wants to, and is 100% peer reviewed, both in terms of the concepts and the data presented within. So we'll start with a simple version of donut economics. And all we need to take away from this here, we don't want to go into a lot of detail here, is that there is a safe and just space for humanity to live, which is within this green, the lighter green zone, where the social foundations are met. Everybody has everything basic that they need without overshooting the boundaries, the ecological ceilings of the planet. In order to be able to live within this donut space, we need major structural changes to what we're doing currently with planet Earth. We need personal and societal aspirations to change dramatically. We need new mindsets. And this talk, and we who designed this talk are here to help the listener to find that safe and just space and that new mindset. Right now, it's looking grim. It's currently looking quite poor because we are already overshooting a number of different Earth systems, such as pollution, freshwater, land conversion, biodiversity, and climate change in the form of temperature rise. Even while we also experience a shortfall in the middle with the social foundations. So, for example, education, peace and justice, the political voice of people, gender equality, housing networks, etc. We are not meeting the needs of the people on the planet whilst at the same time overshooting. And the window to achieve that middle ground is closing very rapidly. And this is just to say that climate change, even though we are technically speaking a climate and ecological emergency activist group or a movement, these things hang together. So environmental damage, economic inequality, social injustice, land conversion, biodiversity loss, all of these things hang together, and you can't just fix one. You have to tackle everything, multiple issues together. Because if you only tackle one, that will not lead to the world that we want and indeed what we need. To get to the world that we want, we need very quick action to restore the safe limits in all these areas. Some key areas matter more than others, and action in these areas will have an outsized effect on solving the overall problem. But we'll talk more about this later. But for now, what we can say is that we are very far away from the world that we want. We're heading away from the world that we want. And these images aren't science fiction. This is up in the top left corner. That's Germany after a German flood. This is the Greek wildfires. This is the Valencia floods of 2024. This is Pakistan, sea level rise and flooding. And so we aren't heading in the right direction, but we do still have a choice between the world we fear, a world in which violence and death and suffering is rife, and the world that we want. Humans are the cause of and the only solution to this crisis. So it is really up to us, all of us, of what we want to do. The current trend is towards heading for self-destruction, heading for extinction, being the previous version of this talk. We are going in the wrong direction. We are in ecological overshoot, where human consumption exceeds the Earth's capacity to regenerate. This does already drive and will further drive conflict, war, famine, the displacement of in the northern number of people, and a whole bunch of other system-wide consequences. On these trends, societal collapse is almost inevitable. What does that mean? It means that global organized society in the way that we know it today will not be possible. Will we go extinct? Probably not. We don't know. Probably not. Will countless millions and billions of people, as well as other creatures, suffer or die? Almost certainly. And there is no other planet. There is no planet B. We have only this one planet to make it work. And so make it work we must. We need to work on this planet, and we can. And we absolutely can live happy and fulfilling lives within the ecological boundaries without overshooting, and also while meeting every human's needs on this planet, as well as every other creature's as well. And there are 5 things which I will show you now, which we'll come back to at the back end of the conversation in more detail. But these are the 5 things that we need to do to achieve this better life and fulfilling lives for ourselves and everyone around us. Number 1, confront the facts. Number 2, we need to change our attitudes. Number 3, we need to change our behaviors. Number 4, very importantly, we need to multiply our impacts. And number 5, organize and resist. We need to do that too. Just store that for now, and we'll come back to it later. Importantly, we can. We can, from a technological perspective. I can see that the slide isn't working exactly as it's intended. It says here it is technologically possible to save ourselves. Feasible solutions already exist or are on the way, so more is needed, but we already have pretty much everything we need. They all need to be implemented on a grand scale. The sufficient change will be added from 2 things. Number 1, individual action, the sum of everything that we all do, and global systemic change, which is precipitated by governments, international organizations such as the United Nations or European Union, and global corporations. As I said, some tools already are in place, others can be developed. But we will also need compromise, because it's not just about manufacturing new and more things, it's also about using less. We need to change the aspirations of human society on a global scale, because we are already in overshoot, which we need to minimize. We need to reverse that if we can, if at all possible. And there are some specific examples of people already working towards that. So for instance, in the UK, so-called climate emergency centers have started to spring up. There's already 30 of them up and running today, and there's another 20 on the way. So in every large town or city, you will find one of them. So from a technological point of view, the science tells us that we can save ourselves. It is also from a social, societal point of view, we can also save ourselves. And the difference between the various climate scenarios out there in the future is us humans. So The ideas to save ourselves already exist. We just need to put them into practice. We need to swap unsustainable growth for a stable future. And what the world needs now is less consumption of the planetary resources, not more. What we also need is to be more fairly distributed. All of that we do have, basic food, shelter, healthcare, sanitation, education, security. It'd be hard to argue that every individual person on this planet should have the right to at least the basic level of all of these. Now, it's really important to emphasize that you cannot do everything alone, and you don't have to, and you must not. You have to band together. We have to band together as a pack. And we'll talk about the pack a little bit later, but just for now, remember that community really matters. And some of the solutions are shaped like individuals, others are community-shaped solutions. Many things are national-shaped solutions, and then of course there's a lot of global-shaped solutions. And we have to be global in our imagination, but also at the same time act hyper-local in our practice. Act locally, think globally. And we don't need to be perfect either. We just need to start, and we need to learn and share and teach and propagate that. So if we can save ourselves from a technological point of view and also from a social point of view, then it begs the question, how come we don't already have the world that we want? And that's because there is a system in place that is preventing us. The system, as we call it, and it manifests itself as unrestricted, unfettered capitalism, where the only force that really matters is the market. But the market can, and indeed should, work for society, not the other way around. It shouldn't be society working for the market, for the very rich people to get even richer whilst everybody else struggles. So the economy needs to be restricted by the physical boundaries of the planet, which will lead to stability and shared wealth in a system that doesn't reward greed and freeloading. The problem with unrestricted growth is that it is unsustainable and it cannot overcome planetary physics. This trend can only lead to one place, and that is environmental and social collapse. We need a global economy where the sting is taken out of being poor and where success is measured in different things from what we measure today. So things like happiness, health, connectedness, and what you contribute rather than what you take away or take out of the system for yourself. So material wealth as a measurement of success, both on the individual level as well as on the global or national level, has to be replaced. And there is an organized effort to stop us from achieving this. We're not up against our fellow humans or the natural world. We're up against something completely different. It's they, the system. Who are they? They're the people who benefit from the destructive status quo, the mega rich, the mega polluters, and their lobbying infrastructure. Now, make no mistake, this is not an even fight. They're extremely well organized, and they have a budget that you and I just cannot imagine. Not only that, they also have a huge amount of access to government, and they basically own the media. So they have every weapon in their armory against us, and we have very little. Initially, when this all kicked off, let's say 40 years ago, they said it wasn't happening, climate denialism. Then they said it wasn't us. Maybe it's happening, but it's not humans. Then they pretended it was good for us. You remember the argument about, oh, more CO2, that's great for the trees. Then they told us to just stop thinking about it, don't worry about it. Now they're starting to say that it's going to be too expensive to make the change, and also telling us that we are a drop in the ocean, and so we cannot make a change. An individual cannot have a meaningful impact, and so we may as well not try. And the other argument is that it is too late to do anything about it, so also you may as well not try. And the last point here is that if you give them space, such as it is happening, as we can see with the Trump administration right now, they slide back down on that scale. And so we have to fight our way back up to the top again and again. But we can cancel the apocalypse. There is a positive vision that is possible. There is a future with a sustainable, stable world with space for both humanity and nature to thrive. One thing to say is that it will not look like what we have today, and it also won't look like what we had in the past. So it will be different, but it will be a far better place than what we're currently heading towards. And I don't want to feel sad. I'm tired about feeling sad for the future. I'm tired of being ashamed by my species, and we can and we must do better than this. It is up to us to create and strive towards this vision that we want, of the world that we want. And that is exactly why you and I are here today, me talking, you listening, and we're having a conversation. This talk is here to show you that people like us can make meaningful change. You can do that individually, but I would probably suggest that you can do it best as part of a community. Finding our pack, the wolf pack, and together we can imagine and work towards this future that is safe, just, and healthy. It's a good place to live. So what might that feel like, you wonder? And you'd be right to ask that question. Um, and there's an important distinction between the economy treated as a machine to be a slave to, as opposed to an ecosystem that is to be nurtured. It has to be viewed as part of the planet. We need to create a harmonious relationship between nature and the economy, which does not exist today. And we need to reimagine the human condition as it used to be, not in the same way, but in the sense that it is part of nature. It is not apart from nature. Humans are a part of nature, and if nothing else, climate apocalypse will show us how true that statement is. So we need to measure, instead of GDP, our progress needs to be measured in things like planetary health and human well-being. What might it feel like? Well, it has to be a few things. It has to be cleaner. It has to be greener. It has to be more communal, less unfair, less greedy, less selfish, less consumerist. It has to be, it probably will be simpler and easier and less pressured, less hurried. It will be sustainable by design with the technologies that serve us and the planet rather than dominates us and the planet. We will have different aspirations for ourselves as individuals and for our societies for what we want out of a life well lived. If you ask people at the end of their lives, which would they rather have, more money or more health and therefore more time around on this planet, we all know what they will say. So we just need to adapt that mindset just a lot earlier. Now, what might it feel like for an individual, for someone like me, for someone like you? And I have a vision for how it might feel like for me. Your vision might be completely different. But here's mine, just as an example. I think I will be a happier, less anxious, more resilient, more embedded, more connected version of me. I'll be living in a home that fits my needs but doesn't exceed them. The home will run on clean power. It will be well insulated. It will have automated devices to save power, water. I will recycle everything or almost everything. I will buy stuff differently, and when I do, they'll be easily mendable, not disposable. They will be cheap to mend and expensive to replace. I'm planning to eat healthy. My food will be a balanced diet, which will lead to a longer life expectancy. Meat will be an occasional treat if I want it. Meat replacements and other proteins will be abundantly available and cheap should I want them. I will work probably a few hours on a community farm or in my garden and have access to plenty of fruit and veg. I will have a strong local community with people pulling together. Imagine something like scouting, just on a community scale. You know, share tools, help each other out, that sort of thing. I will still go on holiday. I will probably holiday locally or travel to more distant destinations slower, unless somebody comes up with zero carbon flights, which, you know, maybe sometime in the future, but not for now. And I will have access to a network of local travel options, which are community owned and either buses or trains or cars that are affordable and all running on clean electricity. I will have local community owned electricity grid. Which will be producing power from solar, wind, or tidal or hydro, all sorts of renewables, and it will be nearly free. And when it comes to, you know, Christmas holidays, for example, I will be exchanging handmade gifts with my loved ones. I will not be buying them lots of plastic toys and gadgets. When it comes to my work, I expect it to be less pressured. I expect to be fairly remunerated. I won't earn as much, maybe, but I will not need to earn as much because I will be consuming less. And also the cost of living will be lower. I will be spending less on food because I'll be making some of it. less on energy because it would be quite cheap or almost free. I'll spend less on travel, less on housing. That would be a great picture for me. I don't know how you see yourself in the world that you want, but I bet you anything that in the world we want, you'll be a happier version of you, a less anxious, more resilient, more embedded, more connected person. However, and this is a tough section that we're going to go into now. Don't worry, we will come out the other end as well. But for now, we are going downwards. And to go back in history just a little bit, this is a bit of Earth history science. And we have been changing the face of the planet for millennia. Um, and we've been shaping it. It's not a new thing. It's going on. It has been going on. What is new, for at least the last couple of 100 years, is the scale and the pace of those changes and the consequences. The part of the pollution, the greenhouse gases, are trapping the heat, as most of you will know, and this is causing rapid climate shift, which is a widely recognized global emergency. It is so big, it's been proposed that we've created a whole new geological period called the Anthropocene, and we're definitely already now seeing the consequences. There's extra energy in the system, and that is causing this heat energy is changing the climate, the weather, the ocean circulations, the ice cover, species distribution, etc., and extinctions as well, which we'll come to in a minute. The extinction event that we're experiencing right now it's on a similar scale to the end of the dinosaurs, if that tells you anything, or just one great big meteorite hit. Was it in Mexico? And as a result, a whole system nearly completely died out. Why is that? That's because we have this addiction problem. There's no question about the physics of the changes that we're causing to the planet. It is us, it's people. There's this global greed and this global need for convenience, which have got us hooked on this unsustainable path. What does unsustainable mean? We've talked about this. If we continue this way, it will stop. That's unsustainable. What will stop? Human society will stop. But we can also, humans, the society that we have today, we can be the solution. And of course, there is no other solution other than us. However, we haven't got there yet. It is clear that we are still behaving in a way that is unsustainable. 2024 saw a record rise in CO2 pollution. So we're not actually improving. We keep getting worse at this point still. Business as usual will lead to more global heating, more extreme weather, and this kind of dangerous process will only stop in one instance if the pollution of CO2 and other greenhouse gases stop accumulating completely in the atmosphere. We need to do this rapidly, completely, and forever. And even then, the climate might take thousands of years to return to some sort of balance without any human intervention, which tells us that there will need to be some human intervention. Now, as long as this current addictive behavior continues, the temperature continues to rise, nature dies, and returning the planet to a safe zone becomes increasingly difficult and costly for future generations. We're basically ruining it for them. Governments and businesses currently are doing nowhere near enough. There's a lot of greenwashing going on, even while fossil fuel combustion continues to increase, despite the readily available alternatives, clean alternatives, and cheaper alternatives. And, every ton of pollution matters and every degree of warming matters, and the wildlife matters a lot. These are not nice to haves. Without healthy ecosystems, humans cannot survive. So we are already seeing these consequences today, and we have been seeing them. We see them on land, we see them at sea. Starting with the land, there's widespread suffering already. Rising heat, rising rainfall levels are well beyond historical norms and averages now. Global temperature increases are leading to more frequent and worse heat waves, floods, as well as droughts. So it's too much water, not enough water, all at the same time. And this is causing higher death rates. This is causing mental health issues. It's increasing healthcare costs. And billions of people are already facing extreme heat with temperatures over 50 degrees, and humans are just not conditioned to live in these kinds of temperatures. For example, in Asia, in Africa, in Australia, as well as in North America. The disasters that we're seeing, they're being made worse and they're being made more frequent by climate change, and they're happening around the world almost every day. You will recall the Valencia floods, the Los Angeles wildfires, the Bangladesh and Sudan floods, the Canada, Greece, Australia, Siberia wildfires, etc., etc. The list goes on, and we can expect more of these, lots more, and worse than these. 2024 may have been the hottest year on record, but it's also going to be one of the coolest years we will ever experience going forward. And there are consequences at sea as well, sea and oceans, of course. Ocean acidity and ocean heat content, both at record highs since records began. These are leading to severe impacts on marine life, mass coral bleaching, and powerful storms. Global sea levels are also at an all-time high over the course of human history. Of course, we know that sea levels have been historically, before humans, even higher at certain points in time. This rising sea level has the potential to displace, about 350 million people living in coastal areas, coastal cities by the end of this century. That's roughly the overall population of the US. So that's a lot of people. The melting of ice from Greenland and from Antarctica and glaciers on land, they are major contributors to this sea level rise. And land-based and glacier levels are at record lows right now. Corals, tropical corals, they're already severely damaged. We have seen massive bleaching events in the past years at the Great Barrier Reef, and they may have already passed tipping points where we can't recover them anymore. And this is just on top of any other pressures that are already impacting marine life, such as plastic pollution, overfishing, destructive fishing, dredging, fertilizer runoff from land, as well as, and not many people know about this, mangrove clearance, which is super important for tidal forces, etc., etc. And we've talked about consequences on land, consequences at sea. Let's look at closer to home, consequences in the UK, because the UK is not immune either. There's an ongoing warming, there's increased rainfall, more extreme weather, more floods, as well as more wildfires in the UK than ever before. And this is tracking the global trends. 2023 was the UK's second warmest year since 1884, since records began, after 2022, which was the warmest on record. 6 of the UK's 10 warmest years have been since 2014. We've recently had our first 40 centigrade day, and all of this is very closely linked with human-induced climate change. It's our very own fault. We've had the wettest years, we've had severe temperatures, we are losing biodiversity. The UK biodiversity is one of the worst in Europe, and it is getting worse with more species seeing catastrophic declines. And as regards pollution and waste, that's just silly. It's a completely avoidable scandal. We're poisoning our air, our rivers, our coastal waters, our groundwaters, and the soil. We don't need to do this. We can change course. Now, we agreed as a global set of nations in Paris in 2016 that we need to keep global warming below 2 centigrade. And the Paris Agreement says actually 2 degrees, ideally 1.5 or as close as possible to 1.5, which, by the way, for the first time in a single year has been breached in 2024 last year. Why did we agree 1.5 to 2 degrees? Because we know science already tells us that 2 degrees is already a global disaster. And yet, we do not have any credible plans to meet these Paris goals. The best current modeling, which actually is conservative, tells us that with the currently proposed legislation and the mitigation plans, warming would go up to 2.8 degrees, way beyond what we need to do. But if we don't have any further plans or we don't implement those plans, the world is on track for over 3 degrees of warming by the end of this century. And the end of the century is not a barrier. The world will just continue to warm up until we stop the pollution. You and I might not be alive to see it, but it is going to carry on into the lives of our children and grandchildren. And the physics is super clear that only when you stop emitting CO2 and the other greenhouse gases will the warming stop. And the problem now is that it could actually be even worse because these climate models don't really factor in, or not very well, the feedback loops and tipping points that we are anticipating to see in the future. So as there's a lot of different feedback loops which create more warming as warming develops. There have been 25 or more identified, such as permafrost thaw, which releases methane and therefore creates more heating, or sea ice reduction in the Arctic, which creates darker water, which sucks in more solar energy, creating more warmth, etc. That's a feedback loop until you hit some tipping points. And tipping points are where a system suddenly moves to a new and very different balance. And when we say suddenly, that's over geological suddenly. So we're talking about years or decades, but we're not talking about centuries or millennia. And once they tip into this different balance, they cannot be recovered or just for very long periods of time. So for example, if the Amazon rainforest tips into savanna, it will not flip back for millennia, if ever. And just planting more trees is not going to do it. And so these loops and tipping points are not well accounted for in the climate models and is not addressed in the Paris Agreement. So if any of these kick in, we might end up losing control of the Earth's climate and as early as in the next 10 years. And here's just a few examples of the types of tipping points that we have and at what point at what warming will they kick in. And we can see that some of the most dangerous ones at 1.2 to 2 degrees are up here: Greenland ice sheet loss, Arctic ice sheet loss, but also the AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation Weakening, which is a very important ocean current system, which can, if it weakens, if it slows down, it can potentially disrupt the climate in many different places. And there are others which we won't go into. And in the meantime, it is universally agreed that a broad, diverse ecosystem is much more robust and stable, and that it is a necessary precondition for human life on Earth. But nature is declining at an unprecedented rate. Species extinction is accelerating. Ecosystems, wild populations, as well as domestic plant and animal breeds are shrinking, deteriorating, and disappearing. And currently, we have over 1 million species of animal and plant facing extinction within the coming decades. And that's by far the highest in human history. And it is potentially 1,000 times faster than background extinction rates, which are normal across geological timescales. Now, we know what we need to do. We just need to do it. It's not a crisis of knowledge. It's a crisis of society, politics, and willpower. What we need to do is to stop burning stuff: coal, oil, gas, wood, petrol, diesel, kerosene, all of these things. We need to stop burning them. We need to stop clearing forests. We need to stop deforestation, stop clearing mangroves, stop draining swamps, stop clearing seagrass. We need to give space back to nature. And we need to change the food system to provide enough food for everyone, even while using less land and cutting food waste down to almost nothing. And even if we do all these things fast, some changes are already baked into the system. So we don't just need to mitigate climate change, we also need to adapt to the change, which is definitely coming. We need to adapt on both a local and a global scale using technology we either already have or almost have. You, us, everyone, every individual can push the odds in our favor. So let's do that. In the meantime, we have a whole bunch of things that we can suggest for governments to do, because governments have a huge outsized role in making these things happen, either for good or for bad. Governments must change the system of rewards. So basically, they're rewarding the wrong thing right now. We need to change the system of rewards in the energy systems, in the food systems, in the manufacturing systems, and in the ecosystems. We need to subsidize, incentivize, and invest in the right behaviors, and we need to disincentivize, tax, restrict, or ban the wrong behaviors. There's just so many examples. For example, we need to subsidize home retrofitting. We need to subsidize renewables. We need to electrify and subsidize public transport. We need to completely revamp the energy grids to be able to cope with all this electricity that we need. We need to stop at the same time fossil fuel subsidies in all its forms. We shouldn't be subsidizing that. We should disincentivize and tax flying, but at the same time, we need to develop and incentivize electric railways. It's not enough just to punish people or to ban things. You also need to provide viable alternatives. And we definitely need to stop agricultural subsidies that destroy biodiversity and subsidize biodiversity. We need to mandate wildlife corridors. We need to ban nature-destroying pesticides. We need to mandate and enforce sustainability targets on corporations. And corporations must change their business models to align with planetary sustainability and not just greenwash. So then international organizations as well, as we mentioned, the EU, the UN, they must strengthen the global agreements that we already have on climate change, on biodiversity, on plastics, on international shipping. There's a bunch more. And so that they are in line with the planetary boundaries, with reality, with physics, and to make them policeable and enforceable. The question, of course, is will governments, corporations, and international organizations do these things without some nudging from us? What do you think? Us, the people. And that's what we'll be talking about next, because we need to ask ourselves, let's talk about us for a little bit. What can we do? Well, first of all, do we need to do something, or is somebody coming to save us? Is it our politicians? If they were going to come and solve climate change for us, 29 climate conferences over 34 years should have done the job, but it didn't. Excuse me. Or is it our business leaders who lobby our politicians for more fossil fuels, not less, and to resist environmental regulation by calling it red tape? It's every time I hear red tape, I want to throw something. It's red tape is there for a reason. Regulation is there for a reason. If we don't regulate, people will get greedy. Is it the scientists or the engineers who are going to come and save us? Well, they've already told us everything we need to know, and they're well on their way to developing all the tech we need to make that transition. We just need to use it. Is it our faith leaders? Now, various gods, irrespective of who you or what you believe in, they tell us to be protectors and stewards of creation, this Garden of Eden that is the earth. And yet, look at our faith leaders standing by as we create our very own version of hell. They aren't really telling us. Imagine if every faith leader told their hundreds of millions or billions of followers to look after the planet and told them how to do that. How great would that be? But they're not doing it. And lastly, is it our social media influencers or the celebrities? Maybe they'll come and save us, right? That'll be the day. So no, nobody's coming to save us. It's only us, we, human society, everyday people that can deliver the systemic change that is needed. And small tweaks are not going to work. Systemic change is required, including changing our aspirations. So now we come to the list of 5. What can we do to save our world? We can feel so small and powerless, and the big and the powerful like it that way. So they'll actually create messages and spend a lot of money on messages that reinforce our feelings of helplessness. They will also tell you not to worry because they'll sort out the problem, except of course they don't, and they won't. So do not let them convince you that you're powerless or that there's nothing you can do. I'd like to call your attention to all the other great social movements in the past, such as civil rights movement, women's suffrage movement, the LGBTQ movement, the Indian independence movement, anti-apartheid movement. It is we, the people, that have the power to change the world. You and the people around you can take action to disrupt and pressure the perpetrators of climate and ecological injustice and drive systemic change. If we act together and do these 5 things, this is what we need to do. This is what we advise you to do. Number one, confront the facts, really the facts as they are. Number two, change our attitudes. Number three, change our behaviors. Attitude change breeds behavior change, and there is no behavior change without attitude change first. Number four, we multiply our impact, and number five, we organize and resist. Let's look at each of these in turn. Number one, confronting the facts. We already have all the data we need to evaluate our climate and ecological crisis. We don't need more data. Educate yourself, be a citizen climate scientist, and also at the same time engage with local, national, and global politics, because a clued up electorate is a powerful electorate. They don't want you to do that. It almost feels like the 21st century, the life in this century is designed for people to stop thinking. So make an effort and make space in your life to think. Be curious, stay curious. Make it your business to learn about environmental impacts in a local community, because that will have an impact on you. And look at measures that can be taken to increase local resilience. It's a key message to remember that things that you do locally are the things that you will feel. And that will give you the empowerment to do more, but also give you proper resilience. Number two, changing our attitudes. So, you want the best for yourself. That's a natural instinct. Everybody does. But it turns out that that means, your long-term selfishness, that is the best for yourself, requires short, and medium-term solidarity with others. What does that mean? So if you think back to our ancestors, they knew all about the importance of a social network. They knew that the survival of the individual depended on the survival of the tribe. And until not so long ago, that was quite an obvious understood truth. And it is only this newly individualistic society in which we are meant to believe that one single individual or a nuclear family can do everything for themselves. Looking out for the future of the people that you love means working together with everybody today. And here's a quote from those of you who know Game of Thrones. This will mean something to you. It's from Ned Stark. And when the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. I find this extremely powerful. So the question now is, how do you define your pack? Where do you draw the line? And it turns out that the only correct definition of your pack now is planet Earth. We really are in it all together. Yes, even the billionaires, because there's no way they're getting off this planet. Now, I'd like to talk in terms of attitude change about something that is probably the most tricky concept in this talk. And let me start by talking about how humans evolved. And we have, as we've mentioned, evolved to operate effectively in a small village-sized community. And we seem to be very good at two things. Number one, we're good at reacting to dangers in our immediate surroundings. We can run, we can shout for help, we can fight or hide. If it's in front of us, we react viscerally. Number two, we can feel empathy for people and creatures that are close to us, physically or close to us in time. Like if there's a child who's lost on the street, we will help that child. We'll rescue a puppy. We'll call an ambulance for an old lady who's collapsed in the street. So we're good at these two things, reacting to dangers close to us and feeling empathy for people close to us. But we're clearly bad at two things. Number one is we fail to grasp the significance of dangers that are threatening us in distant places, either by space or by time. So either on the other side of the globe or 20, 30, 50 years into the future. We might understand that threat intellectually, we see it on the news, but we don't get the same visceral reaction as, for example, when someone is mugging you at gunpoint. You know how you feel when you're being, I hope you haven't been mugged, I haven't, but I can tell that there would be a physical reaction. I can feel it now. And you don't feel that when you watch the news or when you think about things that will happen in 30 years' time. And we also struggle to feel empathy for people and creatures that are spatially distant to us or distanced by time. Again, we might understand that suffering intellectually, but we cannot and don't feel it. There's just too much suffering in the world for us to properly empathize with everything. And if we did, it would paralyze us completely. Now, if we wait for the climate emergency to become immediate enough for us to react to it viscerally, it will definitely be beyond too late. So what we need to do, here comes the trick. Listen carefully. We need to act as if we did grasp the danger viscerally, and we need to act as if we did empathize with everyone and everything, even though we can't and we shouldn't. We need to act as if we cared. We need to act in a way that doesn't come naturally to us as a species. We need to develop this superpower that allows us to simultaneously hold the dangers and the suffering in our minds, but also at the same time set them aside to free ourselves up to act. If you really think about it, every climate activist, indeed any activist worth their salt, will operate in this way, because if they didn't, they would crash and burn out. We have to be cool-headed, like a heart surgeon who must wield the scalpel very precisely and not freak out like the parents of the child on the operating table. The surgeon, she cares on a higher level, but in that moment, she's focused on the kid's heart, not on their own emotions. We must be the surgeons of this planet, saving its life with a single-minded purpose. We must act as if we cared, even while we cannot care for the whole planet and for all of the future generations. Genuinely, we need to act like we do. And we need to develop new measures. We need to develop new aspirations. We need to develop a new system of values. We cannot aspire to people and lifestyles that are mega resource consumers. I was on a concert with my son the other day, and I won't mention any names, but the person who is a famous DJ, and in his bio it says he owns an Audi A8 and he owns a Ferrari and he owns God knows what, a Lamborghini. And I'm thinking, all the kids out there, they're absolutely crazy about this person, and he is held up as a role model because he's made it. He's young and rich, and people want his life, and we really mustn't want his life. But what we're not suggesting is that we need to accept a lower quality of life. In fact, we need to imagine a better quality of life, just not achieved through the consumption and owning of stuff. We need to change the way in which we keep score. So we need to go for quality of life, which is also known as happiness, instead of standard of living, which is also known as your energy profile. Higher energy consumption leads to higher standard of living. So what we want from life and who we aspire to be in life will need to change, and that is critical. The good news is that changing our attitudes can be very rewarding, because just like there are tipping points in the climate, there are also social and technological tipping points, positive tipping points. These are self-amplifying changes that lead to a sudden change. And science tells us that it is sufficient for maybe 20 or 30% of society to change their behaviors for the entire society to tip into this new state. So think, for example, about desegregation of neighborhoods and schools in the US, of smoking habits suddenly changing over the course of the last couple of decades, the spread of electricity, the spread of the car, the spread of the internet, the spread of the smartphone. All of these were very sudden changes. And the decarbonization tipping points are also here, and they're similarly predicted to be radical, such as with electric cars, solar and wind being the cheapest energy, etc. And that is why individual action is so important, because we're leading the rest of the gang towards this social tipping point. And that's another reason why impact multipliers will be super important, which I will come to in a minute. I'm already at 50 minutes, by the way, I've noticed that. Now, number 3, changing our behaviors. And remember this, we don't need to be perfect. Try this for a mantra: action before perfection. Action before perfection. And these changing our behaviors, there's 2 things we can do. Firstly, it's mitigation, which means we're kind of trying to reduce the impacts of climate change. And on the next slide, I'll talk to you about adaptation, which means We accept that there have been changes and we're trying to be resilient in the face of those changes. So here is some mitigation behaviors that can be done in and around the house. We are not suggesting that you do all or any of these, but what we are saying is these are some examples of what people are already trying to do. So stopping burning stuff, as we've mentioned, reducing or stopping flying, retrofitting their homes, eliminating fossil fuels, insulation, adding solar, adding battery storage, reducing meat and other high carbon foods in the diet, um, reviewing all the customer choices, consumer choices, such as the car you buy or the commute you choose, the energy supplier you use, the bank, the insurance, the pension plan, the manufactured goods that you buy, the holidays that you go on. All of these things can be looked at with a lens of sustainability. And of course, quite a few people already carbon offset their residual emissions with hopefully ethical offsets, because there are good offsets and not so good offsets available to us. All of those things are mitigation behaviors. So we're trying to reduce the impacts of climate change in and around the house. In addition, there are adaptation behaviors, and I can see that we also have some slide issues here. At the top, it says adapting to the future, and at the bottom, it says start now. We'll come to that in a sec. So modifying our life is quite important so that it fits in with the new, almost certainly more adverse circumstances. We need to invest in our community. We need to build relationships and trust. We need to make a lot of friends. We need to seek out and praise positive behavior where people contribute to the community rather than consume. And community resilience really is first. It happens in your local community. When problem strikes, your best resource is your pack. More often than not, that's your neighbors. So together with your neighbors, try to reduce your reliance on food that we buy. You know, we can have edible gardens, allotments, community farming, urban gardening, guerrilla gardening, reducing food waste, choosing to eat the wonky vegetables, etc. We can also prepare our homes for extreme weather, whether that's heat or drought or floods or high winds. And also just think to yourself, how would you cope with 2 weeks, let's say, of no water, no electricity, no food shopping? European Union governments are already asking their citizens to stockpile food. They're saying 72 hours for now, but I think that's going to go up, and we should be doing the same. Do you have a plan B? What happened if your current way of life became unsustainable? Where would you go? What would you do? I would say every one of us should read about resilience and read about adaptive behaviors and start doing it. I'm not going to lie, there is work involved. Definitely. We need to start now while we need to start 20 years ago. But in small, steady steps, keep doing it, keep at it. You'll thank yourself later. Now we come to the key concept of impact multipliers. And we talked about what we can do around the house, and one person and their family's behavior change, the things that we've discussed, I would count that as one unit of change. So getting your own house in order is a great start. Of course, you don't need to be perfect, but we also at the same time need to go beyond. So the impact multiplier is every additional unit of change that you can enable or set in motion on top of your own behavior change. And remember what we've said, you don't need to do everything yourself. You can't and you shouldn't. But everybody has impact multipliers, and I bet you have them too, whether you're aware of it or not. So we need to discover them and use them. Even if your own house is not entirely perfect and not in complete order yet. Action before perfection. Now, it's important to remember, and we've mentioned this, that change is felt at the local community scale. So aim to make a difference where you will feel it, and it will give you the confidence to do more. Do not fall into the trap of something, oh, it's too big, I can't do anything about it, and therefore not do anything. And imagine if everybody made those changes, if everybody did the same, we would be reaching those social tipping points very quickly. Now, speaking of impact multipliers, and I said everybody has them, and I bet you do too. Most people can talk, for example. If you feel comfortable talking, then do. Spread the truth wherever you're able. Family, friends, workmates, bring up the subject. Make it a little uncomfortable. Let people know how you feel and what you think. Talk about your personal commitments. Move minds. Change attitude first. Behavior change will follow. If you have influence, use it. Are you a parent? Run your household sustainably. Educate your children and your fellow parents. Are you a consumer? Everybody's a consumer. Make sustainable choices, and more importantly, tell the companies why you aren't purchasing from them, the ones that aren't sustainable. If you play music or write music, sing about it, share it. Are you good at organizing? That's one of the key skills within every social movement. So build your community. If you're not sure how, we have workshops on community organizing. Organize a talk, one of these talks. Invite speakers. Are you a civil servant? Advocate for change. Make the change if you're in the position to do so. Are you a boss? Run your business sustainably. Extend the same philosophy to across your supply chain, all the way from clients to your suppliers, your colleagues, their families, every stakeholder. Do you have savings? Use an ethical bank, use an ethical pension fund, use a sustainable investment. Are you a farmer? Use less or alternative pesticides. Use minimum necessary fertilizer. Create wildlife corridors. Are you an engineer or designer? Use sustainable design principles. Remember, if everyone made their bit of the world better, the world would be a better place. And so this is a moment where everybody in the audience can come up with their own impact multipliers. Lastly, importantly, organize and resist. The good news is you do not have to invent a new environmental movement. There is already a whole diverse ecosystem out there waiting to embrace you. You might think that activism isn't for everyone, or certainly not for you. You may worry that you aren't cut out for it, but there are so many flavors, from innocuous to extra contentious. There will be one for you. Find your preferred level of heat and join an organization. If you want something more community focused, you can go Friends of the Earth, Stop Ecocide, the Green Party. If you're looking for just a bit more contentious, then you can go Greenpeace, Extinction Rebellion, with shades of more contentious and more vanilla flavored roles and actions as well. Or you can go extra contentious if you want to. In the UK, could be Just Stop Oil, who has actually just stopped, interestingly, because they've achieved what they came to do, which was to get into legislation that that no new fossil fuel investment would be made. That is actually pretty amazing, but there are others like them, Ende Gelände in Germany, for example. And not all activism is done in person or done by lying on the road or gluing yourself to something. There is so much you can do from home. So um, the important thing to remember is joining a climate activist organization can significantly multiply an individual's impact. Look at what I'm doing here. I've done this kind of talk many, many times. I've spoken to thousands of people. That's one of my impact multipliers. And that's because I've joined this activist organization. So donate your time first and your resources, such as your money, second. And remember, whenever you donate them, you're ultimately donating them to yourself and your children. There will be a suitable role for you, whoever you are, whatever skill you have. So pick a task, run with it, take direct action, show up, bring your friends and your family, be the change. And look, it doesn't have to be Extinction Rebellion, but if you do decide to join XR, there are so many ways to get involved. Whatever your skills and your interests, there is one role for you. The core of Extinction Rebellion will continue to be nonviolent direct action, also known as NVDA, also known as civil resistance. This is a key aspect of the XR strategy. But for those of you who are not or not yet comfortable with this form of action, there's hundreds of things you can do to help the movement grow and be more resilient. And many of these you can perform from your own home. Just as a reminder, we have three demands at Extinction Rebellion. Number one, all institutions, including the government, the media, and corporations, must tell the truth about the situation we're in. They're not doing it. They're still not doing it. That means the kind of information that we covered in the first part of this talk needs to come out and be made clear and public to everyone. And so number two, XR demands that governments must act now to halt biodiversity loss and reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero as soon as possible by 2025. That was our initial demand when it all kicked off. And here we are today in 2025, 5 years later, almost 6 years later, 5.5, and we're not there. We could have done a lot. Could have gone a long way towards net zero by 2025 if we had heeded that warning back then. Um, I will continue to say 2025 into the future, even in 2026, because I believe that is we go on what is necessary, not on what's possible. And for global climate justice, the UK should have been net zero by 2025. And our third demand, which is a very important demand, is that we're asking governments to create and be led by the decisions of a citizens' assembly on climate and ecological justice and on these emergencies to decide how these necessary reductions are being made. And although there was a citizens' assembly on the climate a couple of years back, it had no legal teeth. It wasn't mandating the government to take any particular action. So that was just as much as useless, basically. Now, if you want to join Extinction Rebellion, you will find that there is a chapter near you. Here's a map. It's on the website. Look it up. There will be either an action or a meeting or people near you who are representing Extinction Rebellion. In the end, to make global change, you don't need to be a global player. You just need to be one of many local people around the globe taking action locally. We would love you to join XR, but you can make a difference whether you do or you don't. So, look at the donut, find your place. If you can create an impact on any of these factors, then that's your contribution. And remember, when it comes to the climate emergency, winning slowly is the same as losing. That's a reason why it's called an emergency. So if you were going to act now. And I'd like you to remember and take some of these concepts with you and keep them in your mind. The donut, where you have the overshoot and the ecological ceiling on the one hand, and you have the social foundations on the other hand. Finding your pack, working as a group, working in local resilient communities, changing your desires, revamping of how we measure success for our species and us as individuals, acting as if we cared, the superpower of the surgeon doing the surgical work and caring in a different way, caring in an abstract way. And lastly, probably very importantly, multiplying your impact. We're coming to a close now. This talk was put together by the humans of XR. Thank you so much for engaging with it. Remember, there's a positive world to be won, but the possibility of this desirable world is in the balance right now, hanging in the balance. Everybody can do something. Everyone can multiply their impact. So together, let's go out there and create the world we want. Thank you. That, my dear ladies and gentlemen, is the proverbial it. Thank you so much for listening. It was just over an hour.